Hello everyone, welcome to another CSS tutorial. As you might already know me, I like to do almost everything using CSS, and this is going to be for beginners to advanced and everybody in between, and I'm pretty sure that you're going to learn something. We're going to start from CSS Houdini API, which is quite experimental and new, and I do not recommend to have it on production, to grid, blend mode, aspect ratio, and clip path. So without losing any more time, let's go briefly into what we're going to build today. And if you refresh the page, you're going to see this preloader. When it finishes, then the content fades in nicely and it collapses like you see it here. And as we keep scrolling, everything is going to collapse or assemble and move out of the screen. This gorgeous Mac Pro moving out of the screen slowly, and it looks just amazing. On the left side, we have a call to action here from YouTube, and it is on the bottom left. When we move to the next section, is going to stick to the top of the other section, and it's amazing to do this with CSS negative margins. And by now you probably paid attention to my cursor, which is black here and a dot, not quite usual. And if you hover into an object that is meant to be a call to action, it's going to change. But if you go into another background, it's going to convert into other color and of course fit to everything. And as we keep scrolling, we are going to see this crazy animation also happening in here. I'm using grid to separate everything, having a double background in there, and then the text above it with a blend mode, which is pretty nice. And it says like this: CSS is art. As we keep on moving, everything is going to move into different pace, and you can see how dynamic is this. And we are actually using 0 lines of JavaScript. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, because I do too on daily basis at my work, but if you look also at the markup, it's quite small for the entire project that we're going to do. And actually, when the section is finishing, the text is going to move out of the parents and move out from the screen together with those. And by now, you have probably also paid attention to the scroll bar on the right. If you didn't, please just check it out. Don't you think this is gorgeous? And when you drag it, it just works perfectly fine, even if you're on a white screen, on a dark screen. And I'm using radial gradients to achieve this, and I'm modifying the WebKit thumb, so it works just perfectly fine. Maybe on some browsers won't work, but there is a workaround for everything that you see here. All right, so now moving into even more interesting stuff, we have this section here that fades in, and I'm using again gradients, starting with a darker color and moving to a brighter color, stick it to the center. As we move scrolling, then something even more amazing is going to go fluidly over every single letter out there. And I'm using blend mode to achieve this. If you select, for example, you will understand what's going on behind the scenes, where there is an actual div moving through everything here while we're scrolling with position sticky. As we go even further, we see now another image fading in, and then it starts to fade out as we reach the end. The text takes another color, and together they move out of the screen. All right, so now we move to another crazy or amazing section that is quite unbelievable to be able to do this on CSS, but I'm utilizing on every single one of these as much as possible double backgrounds, pseudo selectors, and everything, just to have a robust and clean markup with data tags and everything. Okay, so I have a button here. When I click that, it's going to convert this from aspect ratio 1:1 to 16:9. And when it does, the content is going to stay on center, it's not going to be stretched, and it's just going to look amazing. Positioned on center. As we keep scrolling, you're going to see other objects going above it, and then the numbers here on the right fading in. And for that matter, you can have a YouTube video, you can have an iframe, you can have whatever you like in here, because it's just simply a div. And also, when we close again the button, it's going to convert to this presentation mode. We move along with it, and even the numbers move with different pace compared to the parent. As you can see here, they attach to different position and take the background with backdrop filter from the parent, and it looks how you see it here, which is quite nice. Then we move into another section, and this one is quite simple. It's just text, but we're sticking into the left the number, and then on the center the content is taking a gradient, which starts kind of fading in by starting with a darker color. As we move on, it says, like, for example, did you sub. And did you actually subscribe? Because only 10% of you guys are subscribing by watching this video, so please make sure to do so. It helps me a lot. All right, so let's move on into the next section and the final one, which is even crazier than everything that we saw here. Because as you might already know, position sticky works perfectly fine on vertical layouts, but horizontally that's not possible. So what I'm doing here is converting the parent, rotating in that, and then again content is going to rotate back onto how it was. The title here stays into the left, and then the displays goes above it. The computer assembles or shows the other parts into the right like this. And as we keep scrolling, we're backdrop filtering, blur everything. Like everything is going to blur here as we scroll, and you can move backwards, forwards with this. The text starts going above it, and then if you notice on the background I have another white background hiding everything, and we arrive to this very clean screen that says Power the Pro. And I really want to power you by teaching you some of the most amazing CSS stuff, and if you like what you see, you want to learn this, please make sure to like and subscribe. That helps me a lot, and let's move into the actual coding. Alright, so since you made it so far, now let's go ahead and create the index file where we are going to put everything. And basically we're going to need only this file. Now we're hit exclamation mark here, and with emmet abbreviation we're going to add a boilerplate, and then you hit tab like you would normally do. Then we are just going to write here stick so we know that the actual page is working. Let's turn on the server, and yeah, we got the title here. We know that everything is working properly. All right, so now we have to do this first part that you see here, and basically it's quite simple here. We have the header with the logo on it, and then we have this title in here, and then we have this image together with the other one that goes underneath. So basically we got 4 tags. So let's go ahead and add all of these. All right, so now we are going to say, and actually before I do that, I want to explain you something more. I've already went and copy pasted this vars file, which I created into the demo that I show you, because there are quite a lot of things that we need to copy, like for example this body and the cursor and this background white and everything that we're going to need for the project, because otherwise if we do all of these it's going to take even longer, and I don't want to actually do that. But by the end of the video you're going to be able to download these on GitHub, and it will go just fine. What you need to keep in mind is that I'm using this variable called base, and this is the 20 of view minimum height or width, depending on which one is smaller. And this is the base unit that we want to build everything, because on this way then if you just change the base, everything is going to fall under it and is going to look beautiful. But now let's go ahead and actually write the markup that we need for this project. And we're going to start with background white, and I'm doing here also custom tags, and everything will be like separated with hyphen, because this is a standard that you need to follow. So basically every tag that we write is going to be on this structure. It's just a matter of how we name. But organizing files and tags and this kind of stuff is not the topic of today. I'm just going to build everything that I showed you on the demo. All right, so background white, we need this so we cover everything and have a background. Then we are going to make the header, and on this header we are going to add a logo, which is basically 6 eyes, and then we do the CSS Pro for the case because it's the Mac Pro, and then CSS title, and we're going to say here Mac Pro. After this we want to create the case, so CSS case. And inside of the case, we're going to call the image. And here, I've also copy-pasted from the project all the images. And as I said, these all are going to be available on GitHub repo. So let's call the first image, which is the Mac Pro case. And I called it Zach Pro. So Mac Pro case. And let's say here on the title Mac. And then we're going to say CSS inside for the inside of the computer, and again we are going to call here an image, and for this image we're going to call the image called Zach Pro inside, and let's just say inside, right? So now let's go ahead into the browser and see if things are working. And as you can see, the logo is showing the title, and also both of these images are showing. And pretty much we are well set up with the markup itself, but also the special cursor that I already did and showed you on the demo, that one can be just set up like this. We just say cursor, and is a custom tag actually. Okay, and this should work just perfectly fine when we preview that after we include everything. All right, so now as you may see, we haven't included any style on the project, and we need to create a new file called style.css. In here we are going to write some of the basics that we need for the project, and also we are going to import everything into this file that we need furthermore. Like import, and then first one we want to import the vars. All right, now let's write body here. We want the general body to be black, because most of the sections are black. Let's reset the margin to 0, and then usually for the font family, I like to do this all the time because it keeps the performance much better. You don't need to include something, and you just say sans serif, or you can use even the system UI font or whatever you like. And then for letter spacing, I usually do a very small amount, like minus 0.1 character, and the ch unit is pretty good to be used because it will take in consideration always the font size that you're using. So basically, now that we said on the variables 20 the view min for the view height or view width, then it's taking that in consideration, and it's a minus 1 character of that unit. So that's why the text is going to look much better. And usually, just to reset everything for the line height, I use a unit of 1, which this is going to mean actually just the font size. And then overflow, we're going to say overlay. And this is something that you see very rarely on projects. And what this means actually is that the scroll bar is going to show above the content instead of having that space where you usually customize the scroll bar and then you see that black area or something that it just actually doesn't work properly. All right, so now at the body, we're going to say WebKit scroll bar track, right? And on this one, we want to do the background to linear gradient, and we're going to say to bottom, just so we need to define. Then we say transparent, because we want to initially start with transparent, and then we're going to call this scroll bar color, which is defined on variables also. And on this variable, as we can see it here, it uses some transparency, which is 0.1, and it is white. But still, if you want to change the scroll bar for all of the pages or the contents, then you would just have to change this variable. All right, and we want this to be 1 pixel. We don't want it more wide, and that's the actual the one that is going to show vertically. And we want that to not repeat and positioned on the center. Then we want 1 pixel wide and 90% of the entire container or the scroll bar track to be covered by this. All right, so now on body, WebKit scroll bar, we are going to just say width 100 pixels because we don't want it bigger than that, so just enough that we can fit in everything. And of course the height is 100%, but you don't actually need to do this, but we're going to define so it's more precise, and actually it's going to cover everything. And then on the body, we're going to say WebKit scroll thumb, I think, yes. And you can actually do this if you want to, like you can have it on hover to have a different color. Like for example, we could say red and it would work, but it's not that we need it here, and we're going to remove this. And then I've set this custom tag that I'm going to use it like hidden. Whenever I add this, it's going to remove something, so display none to this. All right. And we're going to use this quite often. And then on the body, we want to use the cursor that is the default one, which shows above the content. And that cursor is the dark one, or actually it's white, but for dark areas. And then if we hover the cursor, then we want the cursor to be from the variable cursor dark hover. And by now you might say like, well, you're just writing their code and then nothing explained. But if you go here, we can see the actual SVG that builds the cursor, which actually is just a rectangle and rounded or circle, depending on what kind of cursor you want, and then define the height and the width and what kind of color do you want. And basically then we just switch in between these custom variables and everything will work as you saw on the demo. All right, so now we have also a difference, because when we created this background white tag, we want it to work differently and see another cursor. So we say background white and actually cursor, and for the hover we want to have it cursor, cursor and hover, right? And also actually we want background white to have a cursor as well. We say cursor to our cursor, right? Like this. Okay, now the only thing left to be done for the entire structure, and keep in mind that everything that we did here is going to be used all over the place, so that's why we write it first. Then we say background white, and we want the background, of course, to be white. And then we want the display to be flex. We want again the cursor to be cursor. And now you may say, why I'm doing again this is because if you're not hovering into the actual object, still we want to show a custom cursor, and that's why we need to define it again. Then we want the flex direction to be always column. All right, and we always want the width to be 100%. And same we are going to do about black with just the different properties. So background black, display flex, and then position. And why I'm doing this, and actually we want to do it here too, is that we don't actually want to go something beyond the container. All right, so now if we go here and let's include the style now, link, we're going to say style, and as you can see now the cursor is changed. When we hover here, also cursor is changed, the scroll bar is changed, and everything is working as we wrote it there. All right, now let's go into the actual coding for the section. So what we want to do here is actually define or display the entire area as CSS grid, and that is going to fall into its place. Then we're going to define a width, or a width that we want to contain the entire content, and add these spaces or the gap that we want into between every element. Okay, now for that, we got to create a new CSS file because this one is already too long and we don't want to mix stuff. Okay, let's go ahead in the beginning and say import mac.css, and then you can do this on any order you like, mac.css, right? So the first thing first, we got the header here, the logo, so we want to design that. And we say header, we want to display that to flex, and font size, and in this case we're not using base because it would be ridiculously large, so let's just say 20 pixels, and we want the height to be 100 pixels. So if we want to have it above everything, which actually we're going to have, and then say position sticky, we want this to stay on top like 0, because we want to keep it sticky from the beginning, and then align, actually align not tracks but height. items to center, because we have the height and we wanted some space there. Also padding vertically we want 0 and then 40 pixels. All right, so by now we see the logo in here, which is looking like it should, and we are confirming that it is working. Now let's do the actual Mac. Let's say this display grid, and then we want the width to be, and actually right now we're going to use this calc function a lot of times, but as I said, we're doing this so when we use the var item base, then everything is going to work properly and it's going to scale like very nicely if you want to change it on the future. And we're going to say base, and we're going to multiply this by 3 because I consider that this is the optimum width that we want here to showcase everything. And then we want the padding bottom to be, again, calculate base times 2. All right, so we want these paddings usually, and this is where I'm doing on the container itself or the entire object, because when we do the position sticky, we necessarily want to have some space on the bottom, so when we scroll to actually see the animation happening, like in here. Otherwise, if it would meet the end very fast, then you wouldn't see so much transitions that happen in here. And feel free to do this based on your object. So in this case, I'm going to say that the base times 2 or around 40, the minimum view height or width is enough. And then we want some gap in between, or we're going to use grid gap in here to have a gap in between the items. And why do we need gap? Is because in here, as you can see, before every element meets the other, we want this space to be so it looks like the transition much better. And since we're doing this, we can see here in between the items, and then on the end we want some small margin because of the title and the logo and all of those. Vertically and also horizontally we want it on the middle. Now as you can see, the image in here is quite large, right, and is going above the container, so we're going to say here that we want the CSS 100%, right? And so since we did the images in here and we actually set width to 100%, it's going to cover the entire container. And by this, now we are ready to actually do the position sticky and everything that we need to do for the entire area. But before we do that, let's just go ahead and say the CSS title, since that is looking quite ugly. Font size, and we're going to calculate, as I said, almost everything with this, and base to /2 or divided by 2, and then we want the font weight to be bold, right? So it's looking pretty nice. Now let's go ahead and actually I'm going to say to this to display flex, because I want the text always to be in the middle, vertically and horizontally, and actually create some space on top of it so it stays behind the case, which we were doing previously. So we're going to say justify content to center and then align items to center, and basically whatever align items, not track, to center, basically whatever you're going to add there is going to work perfectly fine. And we want a certain amount of height, and we're saying calc here, and the base times 2, right? Okay, and then we want to define the position as sticky, and we want that to stay on top, equaling the base. Okay, now when we start scrolling, you can see the title is staying on the place. But as you see, now that we scroll, like the title is going above the image, and that's happening because we're using flex in this case and position and everything. So now we have to define for the case when we say position sticky the Z index as well. All right, so now let's go ahead and do the case, CSS case. We're going to say position sticky, and then we want this again to be as equal the top as a base, because this one is as well, and this one, and it's going to cover. While the text is on the middle, then you won't be able to see the text while we scroll, right? And then we say z-index1, and as you can see, now the text goes underneath the case, right? Okay, now let's do the inside. Position sticky, we say top. In this case, it's going to go differently because the image that we are using for the inside, it is actually taller than actual case, and in order to simulate that, as we did on the demo in here, like to go like this, the handles when they show up, then to start scrolling, we need to use some negative unit in here, which is in this case enough to use 8 of the minimum view height. And actually this now should work fine, but before we do that, we also need to add some margin on the bottom, because we want that to exactly equal the case, and this is more than enough to do so. So like this, it's going to stick, and as you see, it just works perfectly. You can keep scrolling on and everything works fine. Now let's just create here a section and do this to height like 400 view height, and just to simulate the scroll and see how it is going. Let's add it here. Right, you can see the scroll now is larger, and as you can see, all the transitions are just working magically. So yeah, this pretty much in total concludes this section, but also as a bonus, I want to show you something even more interesting. And what that is the actual is property. And now, for example, you can notice here that we're saying position sticky here, position sticky here, position sticky, like we're repeating ourselves multiple times. And in order to prevent that, we can say, for example, Mac Pro, and then is Mac not but CSS Pro, and then is, and then open the brackets, and then CSS inside, CSS case, and then CSS title. And now we say position sticky. So let's go ahead and remove it from here, all of them. And when we go to the front, again, it works as magic. So this is the magic of using the is prop in here, that you don't actually need to go on through repeat every single one how we would do traditionally, like CSS Pro and then CSS inside, and just going through repeating this, which is not the best way to do it. And CSS is property comes very in hand here. So let's move on now to the next section, which is the gallery. And by this time, we're going to use also the tag that I created on styles to hide everything, because we don't want to see this animation over and over. So let's say here hidden. And since we said hidden, everything is removed. And let's remove this section. All right, this is quite large and quite dynamic when it comes to options, and we have multiple stuff happening here. We have the text, which is a pseudo selector, then we have the image, and then we have also the animation happening over everything. So let's go ahead and create first the markup for it. Okay, and before we do that, actually we want to open the main tag, because the first background white tag or section and the others are going to be separated. So we want to do this and have everything inside of this that is going to be black. So we say background black as we previously defined, and then CSS stripes. So these CSS stripes are going to represent all those stripes that you see, or columns that you see on the preview. These ones here, right? So we have 3 stripes, and we say for the first one, CSS stripe 1, 2, and 3. Now, since we are using custom attributes, also we're going to use here cursor, as we have it on the preview when you hover, like these ones. we want to have them custom when we hover. And then we want to separate these into columns because we need to call these on CSS. And then we just say data title, and then we are going to write a custom title, which we're going to use on pseudo selectors like CSS is, and then art, right? Okay, and in here, pretty much for this area, this is the entire markup. And don't you think that this is actually very nice and very small to see? But we made a typo in here. Instead of saying CSS stripes, I said CSS stripes, right? And we want to add everything inside of it and not how I did previously. All right, now we have all the stripes. And let's go ahead and write the actual CSS for it. We are going to create a new file called stripes.css. And now we want this to be included into the style, and import stripes.css. Okay, and for this, let's call the container CSS stripes. We want the base here. So this is a very nice sample, for example, how you can overwrite the actual the base variable that I explained at the beginning, and you don't need to multiply like everywhere if you are going to repeat this more than often in a single section. So now instead of 20, we're going to say 24, and then we are going to define the width. Width of the container, and this is actually going to be also a variable, and we're going to say calculate this into the base times 4, right? And everything we want to display as grid, or the entire area. Grid template columns is going to be repeat 3 times by 1 fraction, right? So this is going to enable us to have automatically 3 columns, and you can basically change this to whatever you like and just repeat the content as you need if you want to build a different layout. And we want everything to be positioned in the center. So let's say margin 0 auto, and then we want the width to be equal, same as the variable width that we defined on top. We want the height. Usually we do this to quite a large amount when we want to use position sticky, as I said, to give it space so the animation is seen, and you have to play around with this. It's not like pretty defined, but also if you count the height of each element, you can come up with a number that will cover everything. And then we want some padding on top, and this time we want to equal the base. All right. Now let's do the stripes, and all the magic that happens here is actually the background. So if we go and just preview now what we are seeing here, you can see how the red background is showing in here and the padding that we added. So now in this red background, we need to replace this with the actual image, and that image is the one that I have already included, and it's called Stripes portrait. And by the way, all the images that I'm using are from Unsplash, and I'm going to link each and every one of them into the description as well. And we want this background to not repeat. We want attachment to be fixed and on the center as well. And what's interesting here, we want to use also the width that we predefined in here to be for the image as well. So it is the full width, but we want this fixed because we are centering it, and we don't actually want 100% or something else to be. Just be careful when you define here, because the height is going to be automatically set, and then like this, the width. All right, so now we see the image in here, and when we scroll, we know that the fixed position and everything is working, because you can see how the head is becoming even shorter in here, and just proving that it is working. All right, so let's go ahead and say to this transform, and then actually we're going to scale this down to 0.9, because when we want to animate and using these with position sticky, they work pretty nicely, because when we rotate and do these kind of skew stuff, they always simulate like they're moving into the left or into the right. Like for example this one, because we're initially seeing the position that has been caused by the rotation, and then as we move it goes into the left and you see these transitions in here. Okay, so we are saying scale to 0.9, and we want this to skew horizontally like -10 degrees. Alright, so now we see how the object is skewed. All of these are on space and how they should, same as on the preview. Okay, so now we are pretty good set up for the entire structure. Now we want the position to be sticky, and then we want to set a height, and this time we are going again to calculate base times 5. And by the way, calculating and defining heights with this unit, it's not absolutely necessary. You can go ahead and just write pixels straightforward, like whatever unit that you need. But I'm using here, as I said, to just have a better structure. And if we want to resize, which this works perfectly fine when you want to do responsive. So on the @media queries, you define what you want to have the base, and everything is going to work accordingly to that. And then we want the transitions to be equal var to actually transitions. All right, and the transitions has been also defined here, which is all and 0.2 seconds. Okay, so now on CSS stripe, one of these, when we hover that, and that's why we also define the transitions, we want to have transform and scale it to 1, and how it was, and then horizontally we want that to again actually be -10 degrees, so we're not doing anything in there, and background position to center and -20 pixels, so we just see like a small slight movement as you see it in here. I think I mistyped this. Yes, I did. Instead of transition I said transitions. All right, so we see now how the animation is happening on hover, and actually again the image is going to stay in place no matter what the scroll is. Like you can see here, we can grab the scroll bar and everything is moving, but the image is staying on the center. As we hover, these animations happen. All right, it's going quite smooth. Now let's just say for CSS stripe, and when we do the hover, we want something else for the before pseudo selector, and we're going to say that to transform and skew horizontally the opposite of the parent, and we want to translate that to 0.5 characters and -0.5 characters. And in this case it's nice to use characters because we're moving a object that has some text on it, so that's why we want to do this. And I'm going to show you later on why we're doing this and why here on top. Okay, so now that we wrote these custom tags in here that I said, or attributes, col1, col2, and col2 and col3, which means columns, because we want to select each one of these and give some custom CSS. So we're going to say column1 or col1 and do this to 30 view height. And now again I'm using a different unit, right? I'm not using base because I want something very specific based on that text, based on that area. So that's why I show a lot of stuff here that you can just freely mix in between wherever you need and make your life easier by doing that. And in this case we need 30 view height, so I'm going to use that. And then margin top, I'm going to do that 15 view height, because when you do position sticky and then you have also a initial position, you want to margin that from the other objects, right? And that actually is going to cause, so initially when you see this object like this, see how the margin positions it differently, and then when we do a position sticky, it's going to attach to the unit that we're saying here, top 30 view height. All right, So now we also want the margin bottom, because this, when we do position sticky, this is going to define when the object is going to start to get out of the screen. So basically, because we are going to say here like a unit of 40 view height, then it's going to tell this object or the title or everything that is in there when to start moving out of the screen, right? And that's why we want to define always margin bottom. So we are saying here margin bottom 40 view height. Okay, and pretty much we want to just have some custom for every single of these columns, and we're going to say column 2. And also I'm doing this like with custom or just data attributes in here, because it's not actually the fastest way to do this. You can just freely do classes and IDs, but I wanted to do on this project something different, and just to show you that this is also possible, and the markup looks quite clean. But you don't want necessarily to use this on large projects and where performance is the top priority, and on this case basically it is not, so we are free to do that. Again, we want to say margin top a different unit, but we want to have these as dynamic as possible, so we are going to say 5 view height for margin top, and margin bottom we wanted 330 view height. So all of these are going to be in 2 different positions. Now we want the column number 3, we want this to be 25 view height, and we want this margin top 10 view height, which is not any of these units in here, and it's just going to position differently. And we want margin 20 view height, right? Now when we go and preview the actual thing here, you can see how everything when we move has a different position, just as we did on the demo. Okay, so pretty much this is about the positioning of the objects and everything. So now let's pre-write the positioning that we need also for the pseudo selectors. And I know that you're not seeing it yet, but I like to do everything on chronological order. So it's column 1 before is going to be on top 35 view height, and then column number 2 before is going to be on top 45 view height. So we have again everything differently, and column 3 before is going to be on top with 35 view height, right? Okay, now that we are all set up for this section and for the before and the actual column content, now let's do the design for the stripe before pseudo selector, CSS stripe before, and we want the content to be something very special. We're going to say here data title. So as you saw already, we defined here data title and said CSS is art. So in order to use the contents in here that we say, like whatever you add in here is going to end up called by the content, and that attribute is just going to show on the front the content that we define here. All right, so since we said that, we want the object to display flex, and then we want the font size to be to calculate this, and the variable base divided by 2. Okay, because it's quite similar to the one that we did on the beginning. And the font weight, we want it bold. You can use any font weight if you have predefined. In this case, we want the color to be white because it is on a background that is dark. And background, we are going to say now background clip is going to be text. So basically what this is going to do, whatever gradient that we use, whatever image that we are going to use, it's going to clip the text. So let's say background clip in here, and we want the margin bottom to be minus 30 view height, since we already said that, or we defined on the columns themselves how much margin we want. We can kind of reset for the text or for the pseudo selector itself right here by using margin bottom minus 30 view height. And you can see now the text, how it shows CSS is art, just as we did on the demo, and the things start moving on and everything starts coming together. Okay, so for this also we want the position to be sticky, and then we want to transform this and to skew horizontally the reverse of what we did for the parent. So we say 10 degrees since we had minus 10 degrees for the stripes themselves. And also we want again to translate to that how much it was in the beginning. Yes, I think it should be 0.5 characters or even less than that. 0.5 characters, and we want -2 characters. All right, so when we see here, we can see that everything, it's how we showed on the demo. And then now we do the transitions, and we want that to be equal to the transition var. Okay, we already said display flex, actually justify content to center. We want pointer events to be to none here because we don't want anything to happen when we hover over it, because that would sometimes reset and glitch everything. And now we are going to define the background itself, which is the gradient. And we want that not to repeat. Again, we want to have it fixed and in the center. Also, we want to cover everything. And now you can see how everything is working here. And also, you may say like, well, I did background clip text, which is probably better to be positioned here. And you may say like, well, why this isn't working? On some cases, you have to define like WebKit, background clip, and then text. And then you need to define WebKit, text, fill color, and RGBA. And let's just say 0, 0, and 0, which this means that it's going to be transparent and black. And why you need to do this is because WebKit supports background clip, and on some cases you have to define it like this. And this is one of those like niche features that you have to be careful on how it's reacting, especially with text, and if you're going to use blend mode or something, how we are going to. And we're going to say mix blend mode, and on this case color dodge, because that is going to dodge the color and looks the most beautiful of them all. And now you can see how text is staying there on position, how we defined, and then if you see here also color dodge, blend mode is going above the image. All right, so now what we have to do is the actual animation that happens onto the container, like this stripe that happens in here. So when we want to do this, we have to define also CSS stripe after, and we want the content just to be empty. We want it to be width 100% and the height of 100%, right? And then the background, we want to be that very same gradient. We want that not to repeat, be on center, and this time we don't want cover, because cover is going to show quite harsh for this gradient, which we actually defined in here, this one, 4 colors and 45 degrees. And now we want to say 200, because the gradient is going to be much more smooth, because we're enlarging a lot the gradient. And then we want again the blend mode to be color dodge, and then we want to display this as flex. We want the position to be relative, because we don't want it to move from anything else. And then we are going to do the animation. Now you can see how the object is above everything, and because they are mixing in here, that's how it looks a bit strange for the beginning, but still that we're moving everything, you can see that actually it is working. So now for the animation, it's going to be named as glitch. And then we want that animation to happen for 4 seconds. And then we want a actual cubic bezier. So let's just use a random one. All right, and we want this animation to happen infinitely, and In this case, we want it backwards because we can also define other methods, so we make it much more dynamic, right? And then the entire thing, we want it on top with 20%, because we don't want to actually cover everything. As we move the object, then the animation would be caused to see like everything going even after the container, and just to make safe, we give it some space. And also we want to transform this and scale to 10 degrees. All right, now you can actually see how the animation is happening. And you may say like, well, what this animation is doing, but we have already defined this on the variable file where we have it here on the end. And what we said here is that we define the keyframes and then the animation name, and then we did or used the clip path property where we clipped the entire section into different areas, like this one on 0%, 2%, 4%, and it is quite large, so go ahead and feel free to copy all the CSS for this animation on the GitHub link. And that's why, because it takes a lot of time to write all of that, and basically you can feel free to do anything that you like in there. All right, so now let's say for the column 2 and after, we want the animation to delay by 0.1 seconds, and then we want the animation direction, yes, to be alternate reverse. So we see a different animation on the column 2 and different on the first one and the third one. So now for the column number 3, we're going to say to after, since we're saying already alternate reverse and we have backwards in here, we don't need to define that anymore. Let's just delay the animation and say for it 0.7 seconds. All right, so now the animation for the third one, as you can see, and the second and the first one, they're going to look a bit different. So everything in here is going to look quite dynamic. All right, and now the only thing left to be done is CSS stripe, and then on hover, we want to use one of the most beautiful options we have in there, which is animation play state. And I love to use this because on cases like this, you want, for example, something that is happening to pause that and when you hover. And I think we did something wrong in here. Yeah, because we didn't define after. That's why it's not working. And now when you're going through the object and you see that happening, when you hover over it, it's going to just pause everything. And as you move, the pause thing is going to stay in place because we said hover. All right, so this pretty much concludes also the second section. So let's go ahead straight and move on into the other one. And for this one, we're going to also say hidden. So we hide it. All right, and we don't see it repeating. And let's move on into the other one. And this other one is the mixing, or the one with the, apologize, the one with the text on the middle. And that one, what we have here is a simple text in the middle. The markup is quite small. And then we have a tag that goes above everything, the one that does this animation here, like when we go through in with the gradient. And then we have the image that shows on the background, but this is just a background. And also we're going to use linear gradients, so it goes above everything. All right, so that concludes what we're going to build. And now let's say just CSS mix. That's how we're going to call this. And let's say mix text for the text, inception, and then mix background. And this is it actually for the markup. Like, we got just 3 tags, and you can do all of that by only doing these. But the actual CSS, it is a bit larger than the rest of these. So let's create a new file called mix.css. And CSS mix, we want this mix height to be something custom. So we're going to say calculate the base times 30. And you may say now like, whoa, this is a quite large amount. Well, we need that because the entire div has to pass through every single letter while we do the animation with blend mode. So that's why you need to have a ridiculously tall tag in here. And we want the background color, let's say just red for now. So we display everything and then display grid. Now we're going to use another neat trick that I do, and I do this. Grid template columns, or actually template areas, not columns, to center. And you can have different areas. You can even define with dots or whatever that you want to say that. But I just do this, and actually I center everything on the middle just perfectly fine. And it's a quite nice trick to be used. And then the height, we want that to be the maximum height, as we said on the top. The width, we want that to be 100%. And then we wanted to justify content on the center and place items on flex start. And why we want to do this on flex start is because where the objects are positioned, then that depends on how the transition is going to happen. And that's why we want these flex start, because we want them to start from the beginning and then the gradient to be on the right side and move into the left. Okay. So by saving this, we should be fine. I think we are doing, instead of saying max, I should say mix, because that's how we named the variable. And just to confirm here, we want also the font size to be base. And actually, why we're not seeing the changes, I forgot to do that, is to go into the styles and then just call here at import mix.css, and we are just fine. And you can see the text in here, the background, which is this red and is almost going to blind me off. Let's do this to black because we don't need any other color, even though we don't need it at all because we have already defined. And now, so we want to define the aspect ratio, right? We're going to define here the aspect ratio, and we're going to say 16:9. And this is pretty neat feature to be used because it's going to preserve the entire content on what you're doing and have it just placed in order. And then we are going to say background URL, and we're going to use the image that we had here, which is sam.jpg, and we want that to not repeat, be fixed on the center and cover everything. All right, so we have here also the background, which we want to remove, and we see here as well the image with the text inception. Okay, and basically the font size is being defined here, so we can use it even later, but the font weight and everything we're going to use into its own tag. And we're going to say position relative, so we don't let anything go out. And mixed blend mode is going to be hard light, because we want to combine also in between images and everything. Okay, CSS mix before is going to be content to empty, and then display flex, and then width is going to be 100%, height is going to be 100%. Position is going to be absolute, top to 0 and left to 0. Background, we want this linear gradient to top. We want that with black, we want it transparent, and then again black to cover 30%. And why we are doing actually this, we want this not to repeat and to be center, also cover the entire area. Cover here, oh sorry, cover in here. So why we want to do this is because when we are starting to scroll here, as you can see, when we do this, we start with black and then we have transparent, that makes to show this image, because this image actually is underneath the gradient that we were doing with before, so the image will show slightly, and then again we're doing black by 30%, so while moving it will hide everything, and then you see these effects happening here that the image once shows, and as you keep scrolling it moves out, because we're having this as cover to cover everything. Once we start with black, transparent, and then again black with the area of 30%. All right, so we should be fine by scrolling now in here. As you can see here, the animation is happening as well. Let's move for now mix blend mode, because we don't actually need it in here for the moment, and you see how the animation is happening while we have the text on the top, and we're going to stylize that. Okay, now for the mix text, we want the grid area to be center, and that's the best example on why we use that. So font weight is going to be bold, and now the text is going to center into it's going to go into the area that we defined with CSS grid, and we want the color to be transparent, because we're going also to clip in here the linear gradient, and we say background clip to text, and then again WebKit background clip to text again. We want the text to be transparent, text fill color to transparent. Again, you need to be aware about these features and just make sure that is cross-browser compatibility, and it just works fine, because it's quite strange sometimes how it reacts. And then we want the background image to be the gradient, but this time we have another gradient, because the other gradient is a bit more different than the initial one. It has one more color, and actually it starts differently, so that's what looks much better for the text. And then we want the background attachment to be again fixed, and again on this one we want to use aspect ratio 16:9. And actually, to understand what's going on here and knowing that aspect ratio is working, just go ahead and play with it, and you will understand how it actually goes. And for this we're going to do position sticky. So now you can see how the text is taking the gradient. We have defined the position sticky, and now we want this to define where do we want to have it. So we are going to say on top to base, and again we want to display this as grid, and we want to place the contents to the center, so it's going to center by itself, and z index to 0, and then the margin bottom, we want that to equal the base, because as I said, we want some margin as when it meets the end of the section, it actually is going to simulate a effect instead of just going outside of the screen. And then in this case, actually, we want mix blend mode and hard light. All right, so now you can see how the text is actually taking the colors, and when we go through with hover, like for example above the image, you can see here also the blend mode working just fine in between the text and the actual image. All right, so we are quite almost there, but there's some stuff to be done, like the background, and we are going to position this to grid area as well, center. And then we're going to do width to equal base, and after this the height to 100% and the flex to 1, because we want this to just take one area from what we defined, and we want to justify itself to the center, right? And then transform this to rotate 30 degrees, translate horizontally -1 character. And why I'm doing that, let's just go ahead and add some background red. Did we type in properly how we want it? Mix background, and then we have here mix background. And we want this actually to have no pointer events, and we want the mixed blend mode to be overlay. So it mixes together with the text, and then we want this on top by 0, and then we want to blur this, because then the animation is going to be much more smoother. And you can see now how everything is moving here, but since we said background red, we don't actually want that, but just to preview that everything is working fine. So now let's go ahead and actually do the fun part and remove this background red that we defined here. Let's go ahead and do the actual background. And this is going to be a bit tricky, but you can just go ahead and play with linear gradients and have like a different color into each section or however you want. And for that matter, you can even have an image or anything that you like. But how I did is linear gradient. All right. And then I set for linear gradients to the right, and then I did transparent. So it starts with transparency, and it just doesn't cut it like a very sharp line. And then I said black, and then again black to have it a bit more thick, so you have a better transition. Transparent again, and then black again. So we simulate these spaces where you have darker sections. And then again transparent. This time we're going to switch to white, so we have that highlight above it. Again transparent, again black, and on the end transparent. Okay, so basically just to go through everything once more, like we're doing transparent first, then we're having a section that is going to be a bit thicker with black color. Again transparent, black, transparent, then a section with white, which will actually highlight everything. And now if we go here, everything should work as expected, and you can see now how we have an area that is darker, and then again a section here which is more brighter and is going through everything. So this pretty nice animation happens. As we go by the end and you see the scroll bar here, the animation with the image happens. So pretty much this is it also what concludes this section as well. And now we're going to move on to the next section. All right, so since we finished this section as well, let's close these for once, and again let's use here hidden so we hide this section as well. Now to do the next section, which is the actual gallery, and this has a bit more of a markup, and we are actually going to do this one here. And what we have here is that we have an object with aspect ratio 1:1, and then pseudo selector text in here, and depending on what the content is going to be, either video or something, then we are going to just place that. All right, so let's close it in here and get started with the gallery. And of course we're going to use in here also custom tags. Just say CSS gallery. Now here we need also an input, and what that input does, we're going to use it as checkbox, and just let's name this as Y because we want to select it. And what we need this checkbox is because we want that to be the button that is going to go over everything, right? So this is the role of the checkbox actually, that is going to check in here so it becomes everything wider, right? Okay, so input type checkbox, and then we want the gallery item, and then inside of it we want a image, and the source is going to be image gallery and just the image number 1, and let's just say here image 1. So we have a title. We want also this to be the cursor and gallery item number 1, because we are going to need this to select all of these items. Now gallery item number 2 is going to be, we're going to need a cursor here too, gallery number 2, and then again image, and call the source to image gallery 2. Okay, gallery item number 3, G3 again, but this time we're going to have an iframe, so let's just pretend that we are doing that, but instead of it, let's add the image that we have already here, gallery 1 again, just so we see some preview what's going on, and then G4, let's do the number 2. Okay, so we have a bit of change in between them, image 2, image 3, and image 4, right? Okay, and actually we're going to use the cursor on all of these, but if you want to, you just don't define it and it's perfectly fine. All right, so basically this concludes the markup for the gallery itself. We don't need something more than this, but we are going to use the pseudo selectors for the number, and I'm going to show you a neat feature there with a counter as well. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a file called gallery.css. Then we're going to need to import that. Import gallery.css. Right, now let's go ahead and write the actual CSS. Okay, so gallery itself is going to be display grid, and we want the position to be relative, so it concludes everything inside. Background black, which actually we don't even need to specify because we already have black. We want to place the items into the center, and then the color, we want it to be white. Then counter reset, let's name it gallery, and this is what actually is going to help us add these numbers into the right of the gallery. So we reset this counter, and now let's do the gallery items. We want to have some variables here and scale that to 0.6 because we want to have some images, and then when we animate to actually go to the initial scale and just fill in the space. We want to transform all of these and then do the scale, which is going to equal the scale variable, and then rotate, and we are going to have here rotate to 0. Okay, what I'm doing here with this variable, I'm saying scale, which initially is going to be 0.6, and then rotate that to a variable that is going to equal rotate, but if it's not defined, it's just going to be 0. And why we're doing this is because when we want to hover or do any kind of action, we actually just set the scale or the rotate, and we don't need to write the entire transform property. Okay, so let's say position sticky, and then display flex for this item. We're going to say transform to, as we said, transform here variable. So we are going to transform this to scale 0.6 and then rotate. And we want the transition to happen by the amount that we set on the variable file. We want this to top to be 0. And we want the box sizing to be border box. Width, we want 100 view min, and the height 100 view min. Okay, so this unit, it's actually can be also anything, but I did it this way. So if you scroll or if you resize or anything, it's going to just take in consideration the minimum viewport width or height. And then we want to center everything. So justify content actually to center. And then we want to specify some radius. And let's say here the base divided by 5. Why we want to do that? Because we can also play with it, like depending on the view height or minimum view height and view width, it would transform the radius also, which is pretty interesting to be used here, and it just looks fancy. All right, gallery item. And you may also hear me do a lot of stuff that don't actually make any sense, or there's not a actual reason behind it, but CSS is CSS, so sometimes you got to do stuff like this. When it looks good, so why not? All right, so every direct child, we want that to be outlined to none. And actually we're going to reset some stuff here because, for example, iframes, when you select them and stuff, and when you play something inside of those, they create this outline. So that's why we are resetting here. And the aspect ratio initially is going to be 1:1. So that's why we are doing this. And we want the object fit to be covered. So it covers the entire area. We want again to use border radius because we want that radius to apply, since iframes will not take it from the parent, and we can't actually use overflow hidden, because if we do overflow hidden, then the pseudo selectors won't be able to go above the parent and do the animations that we did on the transition for the gallery. And what I am talking about is actually this one. So that's why we can't use overflow hidden, because then in that case we won't be able to see these. And since some of these objects are going to take or inherit the border radius, then the inside child is going to. But feel free this one to even remove it completely. And we're going to keep for the moment. And then we want to define in here the width, which is 100%. And then the height 100%, and then the box shadow. And why we want to do the width and the height 100%, because we already said cover, right? And then we want this to fill in the entire area, but it's not going to stretch or deform the shape that or the content that we define there. And let's just add some random shadow, and quite large. Actually, we're going to move horizontally 60 pixels from the top to 0, and then blur or scale that everything into 180 pixels. So when the object goes above, the other one is going to do this shadow. And actually when we do the wide mode, then it's going to cover the number in here. So that's what you can do with shadows, and just cover everything. And just a slight like spread of 5 pixels. Okay, so we have this black, and now let's do another one, which is going to be 100 pixels, and this is going to just cover the vertical axis and blur that into a large amount, and again have it as black. And on the end, we want for every element to have the transitions same as we defined on the variable file. Okay, so by now we see the images in here, we see the checkbox on the top, which actually does nothing at the moment, and we see that it has a radius. But right now, when we move on and scrolling, you can see also that the box shadow is happening. Just to prove the case, we move on with the other image, and actually we have called the last image wrongfully. And what have we done here? Oh yeah, because that doesn't exist. JPEG. Okay, so see, now we have the images with the box shadow. Okay, so let's move on. And since we set the style for every one of these, now we're going to do the checkbox, what happens when we select that. And I do on this order because I want to have it to transform right away and you understand it much better. And since I said with a custom attribute of wide, we're going to say when this is checked, we're going to say when this is checked, then the gallery item, we want that to scale to 1, right? Because we already said in here to 0.6, and when we check this and it goes into the wide mode, then it's going to scale into the actual size, and then rotate that to 0, and the radius, we want a custom but much smaller radius of 10 pixels. And now comes the important part. Aspect ratio, we want to convert to 16:9, right? And then we want that to top 10 view height, because we want some space and not to fill the entire container. But feel free to do this even full screen. So that's what looks better to me, and that's why I did. And then we're going to have the index of you can say 10, like a ridiculous amount here, just so it goes above everything when the item is set to checked, because it could go even further. And actually, if you want to have another object underneath it, this makes it much bulletproof, so to say. And then the view width, we want this to be like at least 80 view width, and the height, we want that to be 80, the minimum of the view height, so we have some spaces in here when we actually check this checkbox on the top. All right, so this is pretty much for the gallery item. So let's move on and say what happens to the children when we do the actual check. So wide checked, and then gallery item after, we want that to be on top, and calculate, or actually var number on top plus 10 human. And what this is going to do actually is just take this custom variable and add on top of that a unit of 10 minimum of view width or view height, whichever is smaller, because in that way then you're going to see the transition into the after elements going like even slower or on different pace with a parent. As you see here, for example, when they collapse, then these move differently depending on if it's on wide mode, checked or not checked. All right, now let's do the actual gallery item after content. So content is going to be starting with 0, so we want that to be counter name and then the gallery. And as we said here in the beginning, we're going to reset on the top here because we don't want the items to go or be counted beyond that. So when we say counter reset on the parent in here, CSS gallery, it's going to basically count these, as we are saying now into the content, count these, but you could also do it with custom attribute and just count that here. But in this case, it's pretty nice to use the actual counter reset. And then we want this to display flex. We want the aisle to align the items into the center. And the height, we want to be that to 2 characters, just in case that we have something else, and then 2 characters again. And I usually use characters because then depending on the font size, the container itself is going to expand or contract based on that. So border radius, let's do a ridiculous amount of 400 pixels, and padding 1 character, because we want also a bit more more padding, and based on that, character is going to have it. So backdrop filter now is going to be blur actually, but we want a large amount, so it kind of gets only the color and you don't actually see the object underneath. And then we want a white color. We want the font size to be calculating the variable base divided by 4, and then again for this one we want the position to be sticky, and we want on top to be this variable that we mentioned earlier to be number top. And then again margin top, we want 5 view height. And why is this? is that when we have the gallery item, the actual number here is not going to start from the top, because now initially we were saying margin top, so before it sticks to the page, this is going to have some space on the top, and then afterwards, when that meets the top, is going to stay on the position that we define, which we're saying here, top var and then number top, or the number that we want to stick that. And actually always margin bottom will force this to move out of the screen when we define that. And we want usually that to happen in between 20 of the view height of the port while we're scrolling. And now the interesting part, we say counter, increment, and then gallery, the one that we are resetting at the parent. And also we want some font weight to be bold, and also we want to transform this. Why we want to transform this is because we are rotating the parent, and we want to rotate this back into the initial position, or just vertically. We don't want that to rotate necessarily with the parent, and we need to calculate this by 1. So this way we're going to reset it, and then we want to scale that to 2. So we have it much bigger than the actual HTML or actual code that we see there, right? And you can see now the number there. Alrighty tight. So scale to 2, and then we want always this to make sure that is going to stay on top of everything. And then when we define, for example, the z-index, when we check and everything, this is going to make sure that it stays on the top. And then we want to transition everything based on the transition variable that we predefined. Alright, now starts the fun part, where we are going to define for each and every single element in there a different unit, as we did before with the mix thing and the stripes one. So let's say G1, which is actually the first gallery 1 item here. And again, we're using custom attributes here, but maybe you should do it with class and ID and whatever you like. Performance is not in point here, but we want to use these. I don't know why. So G1, and then we open the brackets. We want to rotate this to -4 degrees. And then G3, which this actually helps us whenever we use rotate in here, and whatever we are doing to just reset everything. And then what's the best, you can even use some pseudo selectors, the attributes, and it will work just fine. And that's why we say here rotate. So basically when we have an apparent -4 degrees, this is going to reset the 4 degrees, and it's going to stay vertically, because as you can see on the gallery itself, we have different rotations, because these all collapse into each other, but they are rotating slightly into the right, and to achieve this effect that you see in here. And that's why we actually need to use the variable here. All right, so G2, not 3, is going to be rotating rotate -8 degrees, and the number on top is going to be 20 view min. And again, feel free here to add any unit that you like, or amount that you like, to just achieve a more dynamic effect. So this is what I'm going. I could also multiply this, but I'm doing this manually. And again, we want to have the rotation -12 degrees for the third one. And we want the number top to be 30 of the view min. Number top to be 30 of the view min. All right, so now the G4 is going to rotate for -16 degrees, and is going to be number top 40 view min. All right, so by now we should see the changes here, and we actually do. and you can see how they just beautifully attach into a different position, and you can notice here how they collapse. And that's actually what I meant when I said, like, with pointer events and stuff, and the rotation, that you want to have it more dynamic. And especially you can notice here in between the blue ones and these how they change, right? But you don't necessarily want actually a cursor here. I'm just doing this in case that you would like to have this as a call to action. All right, now let's do the after. Pseudo selector. And then we do the content as empty. Width we want to 100%. The height is 50 view height. And then position sticky. And then bottom 0. Z-index 2. So now comes in handy why I said z-index 10 before, and now we want this underneath. So what this is doing actually, when we fade in here, is going to show a darker area. So we even have a much better effect like this one, that is, the item is fading in, going into the center, and then you see the content. So that's what we are doing with this pseudo selector on the gallery tag. Z-index is going to be 2, and then the background is going to be linear gradient, and we are going to say to top we want a black color, then we want that as transparent. So basically we're just dividing that into half. And display flex, so we take the height, and the pointer events we want to reset to none in case that we have anything on top, and just reset it. So now we should actually see the preview, and as you can see, now the gradient is happening here, and if we actually inspect this, we're going to see that down there. So the gallery, after, let's add this into the bottom so we know what's going on, and you can see here. And now that we are doing also pointer events, we just make sure that no matter what is not going to stop any click or anything that we want to have here. All right, so we're nearing the end of this section. So what we want to do now is the actual checkbox, and as you can see, it's now staying on the top and not having any function. So we call that checkbox with a wide custom attribute, and we're going to say display flex. We're going to add this to position sticky as well, and then we want that to be on top with calculate, because now it's quite interesting what happens here, because we want to have the checkbox on top on the markup, because when we check this, we want to check for the siblings and then do the action that we are looking for. So that's why we need to have the checkbox, the first sibling in here, so we can apply different style when it is checked to every other that goes beyond it. And that's why now when we say position sticky, we're saying to top 100%, but minus 110 pixels, which we deem that is more than enough to stay in the bottom and just not go above the entire viewport and not actually see it. And we want to position this as 110 pixels from the right. And you can see sometimes I use pixels for objects like this, that I want to make sure that it always stays there and it doesn't move on, because this is more than enough for the thumb, for example, if it's a touch screen or something, and just to make sure that it always stays on the same place. And let's do now z-index to 100, so it goes above everything, even though we had 10 and nothing is going to go above this. But when we do also preloader, we want that to have above anything. So we can say 20 in here. And then we want for this outline to none, actually. We want the width to be 60 pixels and the height to be 60 pixels. Justify himself into the right, and then appearance to none, because we don't actually want to look like a checkbox on how it does. And then we want to define also the cursor here. Cursor, dark, and on hover, because anytime that we are actually doing this, we're going to hover it. Okay, now let's add the background. And this time, actually, I haven't defined a variable, which I'm going to do now. But first of all, let's go and copy that SVG icon, and let's go and create a new variable here, which we're going to say full screen, and then paste the SVG. All right, now we're going to say here variable full screen, and then we want that to not repeat, stay on the center, and we want that maximum 24 pixels because that's the amount of the icon, and it should work all fine. And as you can see, we have the icon in here. When we click, the animation happens. Isn't this magic? Isn't this something beautiful? And I'm sorry, but sometimes I get excited. I love CSS, and when these things just work is amazing. All right. So what we want to do now is to actually have also a margin. So when we do like this one, for example, here, when we check, like we want also to define a margin that it doesn't actually show like this. And now you're seeing this way because on this preview, actually, if I would have shown like into a new window, then it would actually just collapse in here. So to make sure about that, we're going to say wide, and when it's that checked, when that is checked, we also want the gallery item to have quite some large margin on the bottom. Gallery item to have some margin on the bottom. Margin bottom of 80 view height. And what we're actually doing here is that we're going to have some margin. Make sure that the item is going to have a clear path when it's on full screen or widescreen or aspect ratio 16:9, or call it however you like, and it doesn't collapse, but when we scroll only that the image can go above the other, and not when we switch the button or something. All right, so this pretty much concludes this section as well. When you check, it's going to go wide mode, and here is just a preview. So by this, we conclude this section as well. So let's move on without losing any more time into the next section. All right, so gallery is finished. Let's say here again, hidden. And let's move into the other section. We want to have it hidden, as I said, just to not see a lot of stuff. And this one is actually quite simple. And we're going to say to this stick list as a custom tag, and then we want an item. And why we want to do this is because actually we have in here just a number and then some tags with title, and it's pretty small markup. All right, so stick item is going to have another tag called stick letter. And I could do this with pseudo selectors and everything, but I'm actually doing with tags in here because I want you to be able to add anything that you like, not just numbers, but you can have emojis or numbers or letters or whatever you like. And then let's say here 01, and then here we can say stick title, and then on a stick title we say did, for the did you subscribe thing, and then stick text, and let's add like lorem times 2 maybe for now, and let's add here a break. All right, let's just verify if we are seeing anything here. Yes, the text is there. Okay, that looks fine to me. Now we don't need for the moment to add any more elements, and we can copy that as usual. Let's create a new file called stick.css, and then we want that to be called here at import stick.css, or instead of saying stick, let's say list. Sounds much better actually. Instead of stick, let's rename this to list. All right, now let's do the parent stick list. We want to display flex and width 100% and maximum width maybe to be 60 view width. All right, so when doing this, you may say why sometimes you're using grid, sometimes flex, and they have their strengths and weaknesses depending on what kind of layout you're trying to build. And usually when I want something specifically positioned, I use grid, and when I want to build a general layout, but something that I want more dynamic and that potentially is going to be part of another element, then I use display flex. And then we want to center this, so we say margin 0 to auto on the sides, and then we of course want some color to be in the white. Flex direction column, because we are going to generally manage this vertically. And then the line height, since we have a lot of text, I usually do this like 1.38 because I find that works better for all the font sizes out there, but this could be anything that you like and depending on the font family and everything. And then we want this position relative. I usually specify this so we contain everything inside. And margin bottom is usually 40 view height, just so we have that animation while we are scrolling, same as we did here on the preview, and it doesn't just cut it off, but it has some space before we move on into the next section. All right, color white, and we have the tags and everything. It's working so far. So let's go ahead and do the letter now. Stick letter. Let's do font weight to bold, and then font size we want to be equal to base. We want that on top to be again base. Position sticky, and the height we want that to actually be the minimum of content, so it doesn't go less than that. And the margin right, we want that to be equal to base, right? So maximum width for it, since we have 2 characters, we want to do that to 2 characters, and it doesn't go beyond that and take the entire space in here. So basically for me in this case works 2 characters. You can have anything that you want to. And now stick item, we want this to margin to top same as the base, because we have on letter and we want to have something or some space before the position sticky takes effect. So display flex again, and now stick content, and that stick content is actually the entire actually we forgot to wrap it. Stick content, and when we are going to add the title and the text inside of it, because we want to contain this as we have different units, and that's why we saw it on that way. And now it's properly separated, even though quite narrow screen, but just for the preview, as I showed you the demo on the beginning. All right, let's go back to the CSS, and for the stick content we want again to display flex, and as I said, you can use here is for all of these and not to repeat display flex. And then we want flex direction to be column again, because now we want the text and the title to be vertically. And then stick title, we want that to be font weight to bold, and font size base, so it is actually the same size as the number that you see in here, right? So now we have what we saw also on the preview, but as you can see, the text is not sticking because we have to define that, and we are going to do stick title first and then stick text the gradient. Let's say background and variable to gradient alternate, which is the secondary gradient in here that we did on the beginning, and it is a bit more different. It doesn't actually go to 45 degrees, but it goes to bottom. And why we're doing that? Because we want also the RGB or the dark color to show there and simulate that fading in effect that you see here. Like for example, that it comes from the bottom, and until it sticks there, it shows this effect as fading. So that's why we are using the alternate one. And now basically that you see in there, we are going to do the clipping thing. So background clip to text, and WebKit background clip again to text, WebKit text fill color RGB to 00, very transparent. You can have this to anything you like. Background size, we want that to cover, and background position, we want that to center. We don't want to repeat this necessarily, no repeat. And then background attachment, we want that to be fixed. Okay, now you can see how everything is working properly, and the number is sticking in here, the gradient is showing, and yeah, this is pretty much what we saw in there. But now let's just create so we see here also what is going on. And actually we've added here wrongfully. We want it like this. We want to select the item, and when I keep Command and Shift and then hit the down arrow, I am going to duplicate this. Did you? And then repeat again this one and say here sub. And now that we scroll, did you sub? So maybe now it's a good reminder that you should subscribe again, because you guys, only 10% watching this video are subscribing, so that will help me a lot to create much more content like this one that you see here. All right, so basically this also concludes the list section, and now from this we are going to move on to the last section, and let's hide this again. Yeah, we can confirm that is hidden. Let's close these two files and let's move on into the final one. All right, so now let's go ahead and do the last part, which is the actual last thing that we did here on the Mac and the horizontal scrolling. So what we're going to do in here is that we need a parent that is going to wrap everything off, and then the entire content should rotate against its parent, so it shows like this vertically, and when we scroll, then this actually is sticking to the top rather than the left, because that's not practically possible. So let's go ahead and do this, and then we are going to actually keep this large screen. All right, now we want this slider to go outside of the main, because we want this separated, and we're going to use overflow hidden, and that's why we want to separate. And actually I'm writing on HTML CSS, so my brain is quite tired right now. Background white, and then slide wrapper, because we want to wrap everything and cut off, and then horizontal slider or slide. And then inside of this, we're going to have the items. And for the first item, we want to identify it as 0, and that is going to be just the title, but you can add anything else that you like here. And then S1, and we want to have here also a image that I already have imported. Image, and then image Mac 0, and let's just see if we already got the image. Yes, and it's fine working there. Now let's go ahead and just create another one so we are going to see the action happening, and image mac 0.png mac 2. All right, let's confirm that, and yep, we can see that. All right, let's say here mac 1 instead of that. Yep, we see those. All right, now let's go ahead and do the actual styling. We need for this to create a new file called horizontal, or you can call this slide.css, and then on styles we can import that slide.css. Let's go ahead and do the wrapper first. Slide wrapper. We want the first thing, overflow, to be hidden, and then the height to be 100 view height, display to flex, position relative, as we want to make sure that nothing goes afterwards, and we want here a custom color because that's the actual image color on some of these cases, and that's why we're using it, and we want the color to be black. We want this to make sure that it stays on the bottom. Now let's do the horizontal slide. We want that to be 100 view height. And now listen the trick that we're doing here. So basically what I'm doing here is that I'm showing actually the entire area is going to take on the width axis the height axis of the content. So basically this entire container is going to be rotated and then rotate back, so it enables us to scroll, and that's how we are going to do this. All right, so we're going to say width to 100 view height, and then the height is going to be 100 view width. Overflow Y or vertically is going to be automatic based on the content, and overflow horizontally hidden. So that's it. Transform origin, we want that from right to top, and then we want again to transform rotate everything into -90 degrees, and then translate 3D all the content -100 the view height, right? And then 0 here, and overflow overlay. Why I'm doing this is that when the content is larger and you want something not to affect the content and stuff, then when you do overflow overlay, the scroll bar is going to show above the content, but it's not necessary to use, so you can even remove this. Slide item. So now let's do the style for the single item that is going to be on the slider, and let's say width is going to be maximum of the content, and then the height is going to be 100 view height. So we want to contain that into 100 view height. And why I'm using this, because a lot of tricks are happening here with transform, which is rotating, and we need to specify the height that we want for the content to be contained. And the best one to be used in here, since we have a large container such as this one, then it just works fine by using the height and everything like this, because then you make sure that when you scroll horizontally, everything is going to scroll, but this is not going to go above the content or cut it or anything. So that's why you define on this case 100 view height. Depending on your design, you can do whatever you like. All right, now as you can see here, the content is rotated, and of course we don't want this. So let's go ahead and do the styling for it. And to do that, we are going to say to the slide item, transform origin again from left to top, because now we want to rotate it onto the right side. Transform rotate 90 degrees, because on the parent we're saying minus, and this one we say positive. So translate and transform rotate 90 degrees, and then translate 3D from 0 -100 view height, and then again 0. and we actually want to scale horizontally this to 1. And are we seeing the changes actually? What we're doing wrong here. Let's go ahead, display flex, and then align the items on the center. Then we want to position this on sticky. Font size, we want to calculate this, and var base divided by 2. And the font weight, we want that to be bold, and we are going to actually tackle this problem that is happening here in a moment, but let's just finish the styling for the text as well, and 0.1 characters, so we can just confirm that is working. All right. Okay, we are seeing something. Everything is properly rotated. We see the title. Okay, nice. So good so far. Okay, I think we don't need any more style for this, but what you can notice in here is that the image actually is quite large. We want to contain this much better and just have it show as on the presentation. So let's say slide item image, and we want to contain this by vertical axis because this object looks kind of same on vertical axis. And now, yep, we have smaller objects and they are centered, they have a lot of space. Now what is missing here is the position sticky, so we are going to define all of those. And as I did previously, I am using these custom attributes here just to position, but again, you can have a class, you can have different tags and inherit the style however you like. So this is for the presentation, and let's do S0, and that is going to be in the top 50 view height. And actually this is more than enough to just stop into the middle and move on with the rest of the content. All right, S1 is going to be 49, and why I'm doing this is because I want one less view height, so I make sure that this is going to actually cover the entire title. Let's copy this into S2, and we want this 95. And how I'm doing this is that I have pre-calculated the images. If you're going to have something fixed, you can still just say, like, for example, calculate to the base or the width and then multiply that, but I haven't done that, and I don't have fixed width or height images, and that's why I have to do manually. And you can play along with it and just see like whatever shows better. And S3 is going to be 128 view height, and pay attention that I'm saying here view height, and I'm all the time referring to the units vertically, even though we are doing the horizontal axis. And this is the case that I said before, because we have to do this since we are rotating all the content. All right, 128 for the S3, and then S4, we want it to be 148, and S5, we want, we want that to be, or let's define first S6 actually, because we are going to define that later on, because the S5 actually, or the one before the text that goes in here, this one contains the blur effect and the background on the underneath, so that's why we need to do that. All right, so let's do this. S6, now S5, and we are going to do here background linear gradient, and we're going to say to the right, we want to start with transparent, and then we want the same as the background, F2, F2, and to have this for around 40%. And margin on the top, we want that 10 view height, so we make sure that it's staying in center. And the width, we want something ridiculous like 300 view width, so it goes on the top and then everything is going to be covered. And backdrop filter is going to be blur. So we have a blur on it, and pretty much we should see those effects happening here. But yeah, first of all, we need to define the rest of the content for this area, and that is a slide 0, Mac Pro, S1, and then S2, S3, S4, and slide item S5, which is actually empty, and S6 is just the title, so we're going to say Power the Pro. Alright, 0 is the first image, 1, 2, and 3. Let's see if we're calling the correct images. They collapse. The backdrop filter goes above it, the white background, and then the text. Alright, what we want to do in this one as well, we actually want to do the horizontal slide, horizontal slide WebKit scroll bar, and let's just do appearance to none because we don't actually want to see the scroll bar, right? Yeah, now the animation is happening, or the transition and everything as it should. And by the way, I'm going to share with you guys the content, so this is going to be on github.com/astrid/YouTube, and then inside of that folder you'll see this episode, which is the second one on CSS, and there is going to be the entire content. Otherwise, I'm going to point out that link into the description and the first comment. So, and let's go just and see again what we built in here, like the gallery itself and the headline, and then the fading, the gallery with the images like this with widescreen, and then the normal text that we did before, and the last one, the horizontal layout. And I hope that you have learned something new from this, and if you did, that means to me a lot. So thank you very much, and see you into the next one. But before that, please again make sure to subscribe. Also check all the links that I have attached into the end of this video, and make sure to follow me on Twitter, CodePen, or GitHub. Thank you very much for joining, and see you into the next one.